Mr. President.
The senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, I rise to speak on a war powers resolution that will be called up for vote in the 5 o'clock hour, I believe, and I expect a number of other colleagues might take the floor. This is a resolution that I filed together with Senators Gallego and Schiff, and it's like other resolutions that I've filed in recent weeks to challenge the President's authority to take the United States to war without a vote of Congress. In this instance, this resolution deals with the country of Cuba. The United States has had a long, long history with Cuba that I needn't recount here. But suffice to say, as a member of the Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committees, I've never heard the suggestion that Cuba poses an imminent security threat to the United States. And I think it is an accepted fact that there is currently no war authorization passed by Congress that would authorize military actions against Cuba. And so using the privileged provision of the War Powers Resolution, I have filed this together with my colleagues to say we should not be at war, we should not be engaged in hostilities with Cuba unless there's a congressional debate and vote. My argument is that under the terms of the resolution, we are already engaged in hostilities with Cuba because we are using American force, primarily the Coast Guard, but other assets as well, to engage in a very devastating economic blockade of the nation. If anyone were doing to the United States what we are doing to Cuba, we would definitely consider it an act of war. Let me describe what U.S. actions with respect to Cuba now mean to Cuban citizens. The blockade, which went into effect and is using U.S. assets to block energy from being delivered to the island because it does not have its own energy sources, has led to severe humanitarian crises across Cuba. Between January and March, nearly 100,000 surgical procedures were not carried out, scheduled surgical procedures were not carried out in hospitals in the country due to power limitations brought on by the fuel blockade. More than 11,000 of these procedures were procedures that had been scheduled for children. Hospitals in Cuba are facing a particularly severe shortage of fuel since Cuban hospitals are run by the Cuban government, and President Trump has focused on curtailing shipments of energy destined for governmental use, and that governmental use includes hospitals and other healthcare providers. There has been significant press reporting about the humanitarian impact of this energy blockade upon the healthcare sector and medical shortages in Cuba. In addition to the canceling of hospital procedures, the shortage of energy, and particularly the blocking of energy to the Cuban government, has meant the cutoff of running water in many urban areas because the water supply systems in Cuba rely upon electric pumps. More than a third of the Cuban population does not currently have access to clean water. 87% of the national water system's pumps rely on grid electricity to function. Trash has piled up because of lack of gas to run garbage trucks, and doctors say preventable deaths are rising as equipment fails, including the refrigeration that's necessary to maintain certain medications at appropriately low temperatures. In Cuba, daily power cuts in urban and rural areas have been lasting between 12 and 20 hours, in some cases exceeding 48 to 72 hours. Cuba has experienced national multiple blackouts in the month of March and April. Cuba is a nation that is very rural, and these cuts fall particularly heavily upon rural Cuba. In late March, the U.S. Coast Guard did allow a single Russian oil tanker carrying about 730,000 barrels of oil to pass through the blockade, providing Cuba with a few weeks of fuel. But in a country where the average the average monthly wage is about $15. Gas is now nearly $40 a gallon. If you can find it, you probably can't afford it. The blockade of energy also affects food prices. They've risen more than 13%. Restrictions in rural electrical supply are projected to cause a 40% reduction in short-cycle crop yields. Crops like vegetables, beans, potatoes. Cold chain disruption has led to significant rates of spoilage for perishable foods. These are the kinds of things that happen when the United States decides, for no reason other than a desire to change the Cuban regime, that we will impose an energy blockade upon them. And again, if another country was doing this to the United States and causing the cancellation of medical procedures, especially for kids, the blackouts, the shutting down of municipal water supplies, and other significant challenges in the United States, we would consider it a hostility and even an act of war. It's interesting, Mr. President, there's not yet been a clear justification for what the United States is doing to Cuba other than a desire to change its regime. There's no argument that they have nuclear weapons or a ballistic missile program. There's no argument that they pose an imminent threat to the United States. Now, could we stand here and debate at some length and find some significant bipartisan support for the notion that the Cuban regime is a gross violator of human rights? I think we could. It has been a source of sadness that as the United States took some steps toward normalization of Cuba, that did not lead the Cuban government to necessarily open up human rights or freedoms for its population. So sure, we could have a debate about what we thought about the Cuban regime, but a desire to change the regime of another nation is not a sufficient reason for the United States to threaten and carry out military action that's devastating to the population. And so, Mr. President, given that regime change should not be a reason for war unless it's debated upon and embraced by Congress, and if we were going to say the regime change of a bad regime is a reason for the United States to go to war, we would have an awful lot of countries in the world where we would be debating about going to war. But given that there isn't an imminent threat to the United States from Cuba, I am glad to join with my colleagues and call up this War Powers Resolution. We just heard a powerful speech of King Charles III. We took the break to walk down to the House to hear this speech, and it was a powerful one. And one of the lines in the speech that got a lot of applause on all sides of the aisle, and I even noticed members of the president's own cabinet standing to applaud a line, was his assertion that part of the origin of the American Declaration of Independence and the American Independence Project was to form a government whereby the legislature would have the power as the Article I branch to stand up against overreaches by an executive. An overreaching executive, even in matters of war, is not something that's new to the United States. It's not something that's partisan. Executives of both parties, Whigs and Federalists, before there were Democrats and Republicans, often attempted to overreach. But what the framers put into the Constitution, and that constitutional command is expressed in the statute that allows a member of Congress to offer a War Powers Resolution, is that when there are efforts by an executive to go too far, then it is up to Congress to stand up and provide a check against any overreach. Abraham Lincoln, as a congressperson, wrote a letter to his law partner grappling with this very issue, and he said the framers of the Constitution were very focused on reducing what he called kingly oppressions. And he said the most kingly of all oppressions is the tendency of executives to distract or impoverish their populations by taking them to war. And so for that reason, we vested the question of war with the legislature. And so given that there are underway hostilities against Cuba that are causing significant humanitarian crises among children and others, innocent civilians in Cuba, and given that there has been no congressional authorization of these hostilities. I ask my colleagues to do what we were just urged to do by King Charles III, and in the best tradition of American government, stand for the proposition that the legislature should provide a check against an overreaching executive. Please vote in the affirmative on my resolution that we should not be engaged in hostilities or war with Cuba absent a congressional debate and vote. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Delaware.
Mr. President, I rise to follow the comments of my colleague from the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I intend to join him in voting against any proceedings by the United States military, any action by our president to invade or occupy Cuba without authorization by the Senate, by the House, by the Congress of the United States. We just heard an address by King George III, and it is striking that he made a few simple and clear points. He delivered his remarks with humor, with engagement, with respect, but he could not have been clearer that the fight for freedom in the world today is principally engaged in Ukraine's defense against Russian aggression. And he asked us to continue our support with our NATO allies for Ukraine's brave fight and got a standing ovation. He also reminded us of the very beginnings of liberty in the British Commonwealth when the Magna Carta was signed at Runnymede, and spoke about the shared history of limitations on executive power, on restrictions on overreach, first by a king, here by a president. The sad truth, Mr. President, is that this body has gradually handed away the power to control war and peace to increasingly overly powerful presidents. I am grateful for my colleague from the Commonwealth from Virginia for his repeated efforts to bring to this floor and to move forward clarifying amendments, important votes to sunset an overused authorization for the use of military force that dated back 24, 25 years, and to insist that in the current actions against Venezuela, against Iran, and potentially soon against Cuba, that this body do its job, stand up and take a vote, be on the record. Last, if I might, I'm the senior Democrat on defense appropriations, and in repeated recent meetings with the highest levels of the leadership, civilian and military at the Pentagon, I've repeatedly raised concerns about the defense of Ukraine. Last year, the Pentagon sent us a budget, the President sent us a budget that requested nothing, zero, to reinforce our NATO allies in the Baltic states and to support Ukraine. Ukraine is today overwhelmingly funded by our NATO allies, by the Western European partners who have stepped forward and funded their acquisition of munitions from the United States and from across our partners and allies. Last year, they requested zero, and this Congress, on a bipartisan basis, inserted $400 million for the defense of Ukraine. $400 million out of $1.1 trillion last year. Once again this year, we've received a budget with zero for Ukraine. And I've made it clear to the administration and their representatives, the Secretary and others, that if they don't demonstrate how they will spend the money appropriated by this body and signed into law by the President, they should not expect to receive one dime more. So, as the question of how we will conduct ourselves going forward in Cuba, in Ukraine, in the Middle East, is before this body, I intend to continue to vote for the Congress to take its constitutional role, and more than anything, for us to not hand away the power of the purse to an overreaching president. Thank you, Mr. President. With that, I yield the floor. President.
The senator from Vermont.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm co-sponsor of the resolution offered by Senator Kaine and others to prohibit the unauthorized use of American armed forces in hostilities against Cuba. Now, some may think this isn't a necessary concern, but to quote the President of the United States, our Commander-in-Chief, quote, "Cuba's next. This is urgent, and it requires immediate attention by the United States Senate." Cuba is a bankrupt country. It's the size of Tennessee. It has neither the capacity nor the intention to threaten the United States. And even before the Trump administration cut off oil from Venezuela and started illegally blockading oil shipments to Cuba from other countries, Cuba's economy was barely functioning. Today, electricity is unavailable for most hours of the day across the entire island. And think of what that means for everyday life. It doesn't take much imagination. Just think of what it is like in our own communities when there is a power outage for a period of time. In Cuba, where it's sustained, it's catastrophic. Havana's streets are filled with smoldering garbage. The country is facing economic collapse, literally. And the United States is complicit in that economic collapse. So by causing Cuba's economy to fall apart and leaving millions of Cubans without enough food or access to medical care, the White House hopes to create the national security emergency to justify regime change, including, if necessary, the use of military force. And we've seen that script play out before with the Trump administration. And President Trump has said as much. He's repeatedly threatened to use force against Cuba without any legal justification. He said, quote, "It may be a friendly takeover. It may not be friendly takeover. Wouldn't really matter because they really are down to, quote, fumes. They have no energy. They have no money." The reason Cuba is, quote, down to the fumes, unquote, is due to its own government, its failed policies, and because of the U.S. oil blockade. Both together have led to this catastrophic situation. But no American president, under any circumstances, friendly or unfriendly, should threaten to take over another sovereign nation. It is Congress's responsibility to reject such a flagrant might-makes-right abuse of executive power. There's plenty of blame to go around for how we got to this point. Cuba's leaders, whose priority is holding on to power, do systematically violate the rights of the Cuban people, and they align themselves, the Cuban leaders, with ideologically some of the world's worst regimes. Cuba's centralized economy has practically ruined the country, despite its tropical climate and abundance of rich farmland. For our part, and we control our part, the United States has tried to overthrow the Cuban government by armed invasion, by assassination, by financing Cuban dissidents and imposing a web of punitive sanctions with extraterritorial reach. So after 65 years of embargo that has not achieved any of its goals, but has exacerbated intensely the daily suffering of the Cuban people who are not our adversary, the United States and Cuba need to find a way to peacefully coexist. A few weeks ago, I outlined what I thought such an agreement would look like. I won't repeat that here, but at the very least, the president should, number one, remove Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism, which has no legal or factual basis, and which no other country agrees with. And the president should pressure Congress to repeal the failed U.S. embargo so Cuba's economic reconstruction can begin. And Cuba's leaders, and they have enormous responsibility here, should abandon central planning of the economy. It's been an absolute disaster for the Cuban people. And the Cuban government must
release all political dissidents and accept the right of the Cuban people to express themselves freely and without fear of prosecution. Mr. President, political and economic change in Cuba is long overdue. Neither is sufficient by itself. The Cuban people, 90% of whom were born after the 1959 revolution, they want leaders who accept the need for fundamental changes in how to govern with greater participation of the people, greater transparency, and greater freedom and real accountability. But rather than threats of a takeover, the United States should negotiate a solution with Cuba that puts U.S. national interest and the needs and aspirations of the Cuban people first, not the interests of the Cuban government or American billionaires. I urge my colleagues to support Senator Kaine's resolution. The American people do not want to wake up in the morning to learn that we're at war with Cuba. And I urge the Trump administration and Cuba's leaders to take the steps I've outlined to finally put an end to the decades of hostility between us. I yield back.
President.
Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, when I talk to people in Arizona, they tell me they want their politicians to focus on helping them afford health care, buy a home, put groceries on the table, and fill up the tank. Not once has anyone said to me, you know what we need? Another war. And yet that's exactly what this administration keeps delivering, one conflict after another. Right after New Year's, Trump illegally invaded Venezuela with no plan for democratic transition. Less than 2 months later, he led us into war with Iran with no justification or definition of what victory looks like. Now 13 service members are dead, we're deploying more troops overseas, and gas prices are up 40% as a direct result of Trump's failing foreign policy. But as if that disaster of the Iran war and the resulting spike in oil prices weren't enough, Trump is continuing to threaten to invade Cuba as well. What we've seen in the past 5 months tells us we can't just ignore these threats. Trump's go fast and break things approach doesn't work. When you rush into war without a plan, people die. When you send service members overseas with no clear justification, they come home broken. And we can't afford the consequences of that, not when it comes to American lives. Trump has zero understanding of what it means to make life and death decisions because he's never served a day in his life. It's not his or his friends' children he's sending to die. It's young working-class Americans. I know. I served in Iraq with many of these men and women. 23 of them did not make it back. Their lives, the lives of our service members, are what Trump is playing with right now. The American people are not asking for this. They want us to focus on building up our communities, not nation building abroad. They want us to focus on building housing in Arizona, not bombing houses in Havana. They want us to lower the cost of health care and not condemn a generation of veterans to a lifetime of hospital visits. And they want us to make their lives more affordable, not spend their tax dollars on unnecessary wars. But instead of focusing on what the American people want, President Trump has decided instead to focus on satisfying the neocons in his circle, like Marco Rubio, who are always asking for a new war and who see every crisis as an opportunity to score political points in South Florida. Donald Trump, the man who ran on America First and ending forever wars, has handed over the keys to the war hawks and its American families that are going to pay the price. This resolution is very clear. No authorized war in Cuba and no more bypassing Congress. If military force is necessary, then Trump and Rubio need to come to Congress and make their case in full view of the American public and let the country decide if it's really in America's best interests. But the people I talked to in Arizona, the troops I have served with, and the families who buried loved ones who didn't come back now, they know the answer. They know what the final answer would be. It is, do not do this. It is not in our interest, and it's not what America wants. Thank you, and I yield back.
President.
The senator from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today in support of this resolution to make clear that the United States will not be dragged into conflict, this time with Cuba, a conflict that would not serve American interests and does not have authorization from this United States Congress. Americans are already paying the price for President Trump's illegal war against Iran, a war that has no end in sight, a war that is making us less safe and worse off. And of course, before the war in Iran, we saw Trump's illegal act of war against Venezuela, where he put our troops in danger in order to grab Venezuela's oil for his billionaire buddies. And the administration continues to carry out illegal, months-long boat strikes in international waters, which have killed at least 185 people since September. Now, President Trump has also floated the idea of using force against our allies, like his scheme to seize Greenland, which of course is part of Denmark, which is part of the NATO alliance. And the list goes on and on and on. Our Constitution is explicit. The power to declare war rests with Congress, with the Senate and with the House, not with the President of the United States. And yet, we are once again confronted with a situation where Trump appears ready to tear up our Constitution. A Constitution, when he was once asked whether he had to abide by, he said, "I don't know." And we're seeing that mindset in action every day. We have seen deeply alarming rhetoric and actions from the administration when it comes to Cuba. What began as economic warfare has now edged into open discussions of military intervention. President Trump himself has said, and I quote, "Taking Cuba, I mean, whether I free it, take it, I think I can do anything I want with it," end quote. But we all know that Cuba is not property to be acquired by Donald Trump. And military force is not supposed to be a tool for presidential impulse or political theater. And no president has the legal authority to unilaterally send American troops into conflict, starting a war. But Trump has shown again and again that he thinks he's above the law and above the Constitution. Many of us just joined the King of England, King Charles, where he talked about the Magna Carta and checks and balances. This President of the United States thinks he's a king and thinks he's not bound by checks and balances. And any of our colleagues who aid and abet him are complicit in undermining the Constitution of the United States, one that he has shown disdain for time and again. To understand why we're here, we need to look at the choices this administration and previous administrations have made and the consequences that have followed. President Trump's current policy on Cuba is not a total aberration. It is him and Secretary Rubio doubling down and putting on steroids over 65 years of a failed, bankrupt policy. Since 1960, Republicans and Democratic administrations alike have pursued a policy of isolation and economic pressure and strangulation toward Cuba. And after 6.5 decades, the promise of political change still has not been realized. You would think when you keep doing something and don't get the result you want, you would do something different. Instead, we see the Trump administration doubling down and putting their foot on the gas of failed policies. Now, I recall that under President Obama, the United States began to turn the tide, began to take some positive steps. The Obama administration restored diplomatic relations, expanded travel, and made an effort to engage with Cuba in a way that had not been done in decades. And I had a chance to see this newfound diplomacy up close. My first trip to Cuba was to visit an American called Alan Gross. He was part of an international development contractor with USAID, and he was a constituent of mine in Maryland. He was imprisoned by the Cuban government for 5 years. I worked closely with the Obama administration to help secure his release and joined the bipartisan delegation that included Senator Leahy and Senator Flake at the time that ultimately brought Alan Gross home in 2014. That breakthrough played a role in opening the door to a new chapter in U.S.-Cuban relations. And at the time, we began to see some shoots of real progress and liberalization in the Cuban economy. Now, the problems at hand were, of course, not solved overnight, but the light at the end of the tunnel was beginning to look brighter. And it was clear that this new approach had real potential. But that chapter was short-lived, as President Trump, in his first term, reversed course, reimposing strict travel restrictions and tightening sanctions, back to the failed playbook of over 60 years. A diplomatic relationship cannot be repaired overnight, especially with two countries with decades of fraught history, like the United States and Cuba. And the Biden administration failed to take meaningful steps to get us back on the course that the Obama administration had taken us. Which brings us to where we are today, with the Trump administration not only reverting to their first-term policies, but doubling down on this hostile, ineffective, and proven failure of an approach. Trump administration has pursued an aggressive pressure campaign against Cuba, tightening restrictions, cutting off critical fuel supplies, and effectively imposing an oil blockade on the island. An oil blockade that is exhausting the country's supply of fuel, both restricting travel and daily life within the country, while also crippling the nation's health care system, resulting in preventable deaths. Here's a headline from the March 26th New York Times. It reads, quote, "Cuban patients are dying because of U.S. blockade, doctors say," unquote. The stated goal was to force political change in Havana. But months into the Trump administration's belligerent approach, it's clear that they have not begun to achieve the intended result. Again, same old policy, no better results. In fact, worse. The Cuban authoritarian government remains fully in control, and instead, what we are seeing is the rapid deterioration of conditions for the people of Cuba. Across the island, families are living through prolonged blackouts and an energy crisis that has crippled infrastructure across the island. Without sufficient fuel, hospitals cannot function properly. Schools and businesses are forced to close. Families are left to navigate daily life without the most basic necessities. The only change that the United States has succeeded in forcing upon Cuba is a humanitarian crisis affecting millions of people because of Trump and Rubio's reckless blockade that is punishing the Cuban people, not the Cuban regime. Mr. President, we've seen this approach before. We've seen it for 60 years. We know how it ends. And the longer we continue down this path, the more severe the consequences will become, not for those in power, but for the millions of people caught in the middle. And that should force all of us to ask a critical question. What exactly is the Trump-Rubio strategy here? We seem they don't have a strategy in Iran, and they clearly don't have a strategy here. Because if the goal is to support the Cuban people, then it is failing. Failing. Because what we are seeing is yet another policy built on the assumption that maximum pressure will produce quick political change. Instead, it has produced maximum citizen and civilian suffering with minimal results. And now, instead of reconsidering this failed approach, the administration appears to be considering an even more dangerous step, that of military escalation. Of course, we want democracy and fundamental freedoms for the people of Cuba. But we've seen over decades that economic strangulation does not work. And we have learned the hard way in Afghanistan and now Iran that bombs don't turn dictatorships into democracies. And yet, here we are with reports the administration is considering yet another war that is not in this country's interests. Americans are asking for stability. They're asking for lower costs. And yet, the idea of launching another illegal, costly regime change war is completely out of step with what their hopes and aspirations are. And yet, that's what this administration is pursuing, even when candidate Trump promised that he would focus on bringing down prices and keeping us out of war. Mr. President, the American people are already bearing significant costs of the war in Iran. Lives lost, treasure expended, making us less safe, and all of this not authorized by this Congress. And now, instead of bringing that conflict to an end, this administration is signaling it may open the door to yet another one in Cuba. We have to ask what gets crowded out when we have a president and a White House that's focused on getting Americas into war rather than on the economic well-being of the American people. We have a responsibility here to the American people to represent them and to act in their interests. And decisions of war and peace, whether it's Iran or Cuba or anywhere else, must be made with the involvement of the representatives of the American people. That's not just my sentiment. That is what is in the Constitution of the United States. So we have the opportunity today to get ahead of another bad decision by the Trump administration, another bad decision to drag us into an illegal war, and to do it now before that conflict begins, instead of hoping that we can end it once the fuse is lit. In fact, it's our duty. It's our duty to uphold the Constitution and make clear that we will do our jobs here in the United States Senate. So I urge my colleagues to support this resolution, to uphold our constitutional responsibilities, and to vote in favor of this War Powers resolution. And I yield the floor.
The senator from Florida.
Mr. President, the measure we're talking about is completely out of touch with the facts in Cuba. Nor is it relevant to anything actually happening in Cuba right now. President Trump has never suggested we put troops on the ground in Cuba, so this entire effort is moot. The only reason I can think a Democrat would propose this is for a fundraising email showing how they are fighting President Trump tooth and nail. I want to note that elected Democrats have turned up violent rhetoric against this president the last several years, resulting in yet another radicalized left-winger attempting to assassinate President Trump on Saturday night. And my Democrat colleagues still refuse to fund paychecks for the Secret Service agents who stopped the shooter or for the ICE and Border Patrol agents protecting American lives. But since Democrats refuse to fix that problem they created, let's talk about the resolution before us today. I'm from Florida. We probably have more Cuban Americans in Florida than any state in the country. And they've been unbelievably successful in our state. So I always love to talk about Cuba, and I'm glad there are Democrats who want to talk about Cuba. Since the 1959 socialist revolution, the authoritarian dictatorship has refused to hold free and fair elections in Cuba. So no elections in Cuba. There's no duly elected president in Cuba. The Castro regime has killed Americans and its citizens, and they cozy up to our enemies, Russia, Communist China, Iran, and Hezbollah. Now, Democrats say they're the party of democracy. So where is their concern for the anti-democratic dictator operating 90 miles from the shore of Florida, 90 miles from the shore of the United States? Many Democrats, some in this chamber, embracing socialism, and even embracing a violent socialist leader, Hassan Piker, that wants me murdered. He says I should be murdered, capitalists should be murdered, 9/11, we deserved it, anti-Semitic, and he supports the regime in Cuba. Some Democrats have even gone to Cuba with Piker, attempting to whitewash the atrocities of the illegitimate communist regime. Now, when they went there, did they go to the prisons to see any of the political prisoners? Did they ask about any of the political prisoners? Did they try to get one political prisoner released? Not one. One Democrat congresswoman even said that after a trip that Cuba has a remarkable public health care system. Now, if you talk to political prisoners and you talk to their families, that's not exactly what they would tell you. Some Democrats say they want socialism. Where has that succeeded? Nowhere. It results in misery and death for everyone but the regime leaders. Every place it's tried, it's always failed, and the only people that succeed are the regime leaders. Right now, for decades, Cuba has been unjustly imprisoning hundreds of political prisoners just for demanding elections and complaining that the regime is failing to provide electricity. There's a 6-year-old boy in prison right now because he complained his family didn't have electricity. Have I heard one of my Democrat colleagues say, oh, that's wrong? When they say under Obama, oh, things were better. Oh, did all the political prisoners get released? No. Now, there's a photo right here. What year do you think this was taken? Do you think it was taken during the Second World War, at a concentration camp, a Holocaust survivor? Do you think it was maybe from a Soviet prison? What year do you think, Mr. President? What's your guess as far as the year this was taken? This was taken just a few miles from the Florida shore, probably less than 100 miles from our shore, just a few weeks ago. This individual, his name is Alexander Diaz-Rodriguez. Now, if you look at the before he went to prison picture, he doesn't look 30 years old. But he is a political prisoner. He was tortured, starved, isolated. He was denied this unbelievable healthcare system in Cuba, even though he has cancer, all because he opposed the social regime. Now, one of my Democrat colleagues that went down to Cuba did one thing to get him out of prison. This is the misery of the people of Cuba. This is the face of the misery of the people in Cuba. Now, the president of Cuba just had an interview with a mainstream media. Did not ask one question about the political prisoners. Didn't ask any of these things. Now, a lot of people never want to look at these pictures, never want to post these. I'm going to look at this, and I'm going to talk about this as long as possible. We all should be thinking about this is the face of the regime in Cuba. And when you go support the regime in Cuba, you are supporting what they're doing to an individual like Alexander. Now, Democrats in this chamber will choose to oppose President Trump, but not Cuba's illegitimate communist dictator, Miguel Diaz-Canel. The real reason we're discussing this is what one of my Democrat colleagues said. My Democrat colleague said he plans to keep introducing these resolutions just to criticize President Trump, waste our time, and ask, quote, have you seen enough? One of my Democrat colleagues even admitted that on national television. But again, President Trump has never said that he wants to put boots on the ground. I don't think any of my Republican colleagues have ever said it. Even Lindsey Graham has not said it. So this resolution is defending the regime that is oppressing people like Alexander Diaz-Rodriguez. Well, I asked my Democrat colleagues, take a look at this picture. Look at this picture and think of what that regime is doing. This is what the Cuban regime is doing to the people right now. So to my Democrat colleagues, have you seen enough? Have you seen enough to say this has to stop? President Trump is doing everything he can to bring back freedom and democracy all across Latin America, and we should do everything we can to support him. This president has never said he wants to put boots on the ground. This is a complete waste of our time. It's a complete insult to Cubans in Cuba and Cubans in my state. I yield the floor.
The senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, I'm about to make a motion with respect to the War Powers Resolution, but I understand there will be a point of order offered that's not debatable, and so I just want to say my understanding is that the point of order will suggest that what is currently engaged in Cuba is not hostilities. The War Powers Resolution clearly contemplates a resolution being within the contemplation of the body if hostilities are undergoing or are imminent, because Congress wanted an ability for Congress to stop a war before it started, and that was contemplated in the War Powers Resolution. But I would also point out that the U.S. is using force to block energy from going to Cuba, and that has led to the cancellation of 100,000 surgeries in hospitals, including 11,000 for children. It's led to massive power blackouts. It's led to the unavailability of clean water because water systems depend upon electric pumps. And my argument would be if anyone was doing that to the United States and affecting our citizens in that way, we would certainly view that as hostilities that we would want to do everything we could to stop. But with that, Mr. President, pursuant to Section 1013 of the Department of State Authorization Act for fiscal years 84 and 85, that's 50 U.S.C. Section 1546A, and in accordance with Section 601B of the International Security Assistance and Arms Control Act of 1976, I move to discharge the Committee on Foreign Relations from further consideration of S.J. Res. 124.
The clerk will report.
Motion to discharge S.J. Res. 124 from the Committee on Foreign Relations, joint resolution to direct the removal of United States Armed Forces from hostilities within or against the Republic of Cuba that have not been authorized by Congress.
And I'd ask for consent to yield back all remaining time.
Without objection. The senator from Florida.
I just want to say I'm from Florida, and I have more probably Cuban Americans in my state than any place in the country. This is really important. The Cuban regime has just been despicable. They've killed Americans. They've destroyed the lives of Cubans for decades, and this has to change. I make a point of order that this joint resolution is not entitled to privilege under 50 U.S.C. 1546A due to U.S. troops not being engaged in hostilities.
Chair submits the question to the Senate for its decision. The question is the point of order well taken?
I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Also Brooks, Mr. Armstrong, Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Banks. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Bennett. Mrs. Blackburn. Mr. Blumenthal. Ms. Blunt Rochester. Mr. Booker. Mr. Bozeman. Mrs. Brett. Mr. Budd. Ms. Cantwell. Mrs. Capito. Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons. Mr. Cornyn. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis.
Yes.
Mr. Daines,
Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan. Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Mr. Rono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kaine, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Moreno, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Armstrong, Barrasso, Britt, Crapo, Curtis, Ernst, Graham, Grassley, Moody, Moreno, Scott of Florida, Scott of South Carolina, Wicker. Senators voting in the negative: Also Brooks, Baldwin, Coons, Cortez Masto, Duckworth, Durbin, Gillibrand, Kaine, Merkley, Murray, Reed, Rosen, Schatz, Schiff, Shaheen, Warren, Wyden. Mr. Heinrich? No. Mr. Risch, aye. Mrs. Capito, aye. Mr. Paul, no. Mr. Husted, aye. Mr. Hickenlooper. Mr. Hickenlooper, aye. Mr. Hickenlooper, no. Mr. Schumer, no. Mrs. Blackburn, aye. Mr. Warnock, no. Mr. Thune, aye. Ms. Hassan, no. Mr. Whitehouse, no. Mr. Gallego, no. Mr. Lujan, no. Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, aye. Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Van Hollen, no. Mr. Justice, aye. Mr. Banks, aye. Ms. Slotkin, no. Mr. Padilla, no. Mr. Murphy, no. Mr. Johnson, aye. Mr. Cotton, aye. Mr. Budd, aye. Mr. Ossoff, no. Ms. Hirono, no. Ms. Klobuchar, no. Mr. Kim, no. Mr. Bennett, no. Ms. Markowski, aye. Ms. Cantwell, no. Mr. Cruz, aye. Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Rounds, aye. Mr. Kennedy, aye. Mr. Sanders, no. Ms. Collins, no. Mr. Daines, aye. Mr. Lee, aye. Mr. Tillis, aye. Mr. Schmidt, aye. Mr. Cornyn, aye. Ms. Lummis, aye. Mr. Peters, no. Mr. Ricketts, aye. Mr. Hawley, aye. Ms. Smith, no. Mr. Bozeman, aye. Mr. Sheehy, aye. Mr. King, no. Mr. Fetterman, aye. Ms. Blunt Rochester, no. Mr. Kelly, no. Mr. Sullivan, aye. Mr. Booker, no. Mr. McCormick, aye. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mr. Moran. Mr. Moran, aye. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. Marshall, aye. Mr. Young, aye. Mr. Blumenthal, no. Mr. Langford. Mr. Langford, aye. Mr. Welch, no. Mr. Kramer, aye. Mr. Haggerty, aye. Mr. Cassidy, Mr. Cassidy. Aye.
That's a great song.
Mrs. Fisher, aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 51, the nays are 47. The point of order is well taken. The motion to discharge fails. Senator from Louisiana.
Mr. President, thank you. With me today are two of my interns that I have enjoyed working with, Miss Rebecca Stridell and Mr. Charlie Kay. And I wanted to also with me, he's not a summer intern. He's one of my permanent colleagues, Mr. John Larry. But I want to thank Rebecca and Charlie for working with me and for their good work, and it's been a pleasure. And I hope you learned a lot. And thank you for being a part of our team. I'm going to talk about a couple of subjects today, Mr. President. First, I thought it would be appropriate to make a comment about the White House Correspondents Association dinner Saturday night. I want to be clear, I was not there. So I don't know whether that helps my perspective or hurts it, but I was at home watching the NBA playoffs. The Timberwolves won, by the way. I'm sorry it happened Saturday night. I'm glad no one got hurt. I think what happened is as straightforward as it is tragic. An overeducated, underemployed, self-righteous punk from California who thinks he's smarter and more virtuous than the American people, and who thinks if you disagree with him, you're not only in error, you're in sin and deserve to die, tried to crash the function and assassinate the president and some members of his administration. Many members of our media, and look, I'm glad no one was hurt. I said that, but I want to emphasize that. Some members of the media will portray him as a victim. They'll say his mom or daddy didn't love him enough, or maybe he was just mixed up or confused or had a mental defect. They can say what they want, but I believe in free will and responsibility, and this punk was responsible for his actions, and he's going to be punished, and he, frankly, should be punished. I also want to say a word about security. Look, we're going to hold hearings. We love to hold hearings on Capitol Hill. That's one of our favorite things to do. And there are going to be hearings held about the security provided by our Secret Service and others. I'm not saying those hearings shouldn't be held. I'm not a security expert, but I want to thank the members of law enforcement who prevented what could have been a very serious tragedy Saturday night. I'm pretty familiar with the Washington Hilton Hotel, and the truth is, those who are also familiar with it know that this guy never got close. He was on a different floor. He never made it to the right floor. And that's because of our brave women and men who provided security. In fact, I thought our security showed great restraint. I was frankly very surprised that this punk didn't end up like a piece of Swiss cheese. Mr. President, could I ask my colleagues here to hold it down for a minute? Maybe they could take their discussions off the floor.
Can we have order in the floor?
I know they got work to do, but I got work to do too. And I can't hear myself think here. Let me say a word about King Charles. King Charles spoke to a joint session of Congress today. I thank him so much for coming. He was eloquent. He was charming. He was funny. He talked about the special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom. And we do have a special relationship, and I hope it can continue. And I want to come back to the King's visit. In preparation for the King's visit and the King's speech, I read an article in particular in The Economist magazine. I read The Economist magazine anyway every week. In my opinion, I've read it cover to cover. It's really, some call it a newspaper, but it really is a magazine. I've read it cover to cover for 25 years. It covers the world. I've always enjoyed the reporting because it's very in-depth, it's very factual. Just about every author of every article offers his or her opinion, but it's subtle and it's nuanced. And usually they offer their opinion after presenting both sides of the story. It hurts me to say, disappoints me to say, that in the past year, the Economist has really changed. Their reporting has crossed the line, in my opinion. They are so angry at the president and angry at America that it has seeped into their reporting, and I really regret that. I'm going to keep reading them, but I really regret that they've given in to their repetitive desires and lost some of their objectivity. And the article in particular that I read it on the plane. I don't remember whether I was going home or coming up. But the article that I read in preparation for King Charles's visit was entitled, "Britain Rethinks Its Special Relationship with America." Britain rethinks its special relationship with America. And this was the question that The Economist was asking. Should Britain, the United Kingdom, with which we do have a special relationship, should the United Kingdom keep hugging America or embrace Europe? Like it was a buffet, like they have a choice. And in the article, it startled me. The article also points out, and this also surprised me, disappointed me, that the author of the article pointed it out almost gleefully, that today, when you poll the American people and ask them if they approve of Britain, 76% of Americans approve. When you ask our friends in Britain if they approve of America, only 34% do. That would surprise me. I want to set the record straight that regardless of what the polls show, America does have a special relationship with the United Kingdom. And it's an important relationship. And that's why the American people spilled their blood and spent their treasure in 1917 to protect the British Empire. That's why the American people spent their treasure and spilled their blood in 1941 in World War II to protect the British Empire, which would not have won without America's help. After World War II, Great Britain, it was horrible. They were devastated. Flat on their back, broke. America, still, they were our friends, special friends. America lifted them up, bankrolled their reconstruction. We went in, loaned them money, helped them get back on their feet. And then shortly after World War II, we, of course, discovered that we meaning the United Kingdom and the United States, had a new enemy in the Soviet Union. We protected the United Kingdom all through the Cold War. I'm proud of that. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. In fact, if you look at the numbers today, we still protect the United Kingdom and NATO and our friends in Europe. If you look at the money, I know there's been a lot of rhetoric about our allies in Europe are going to do better and spend more money on their own defense, but the numbers are the numbers. The American taxpayer still puts up 60% of total NATO defense spending today. We put up $845 billion a year to protect our cousins in the United Kingdom and in Europe. I support NATO. I support continuing to do that. And so I agree with King Charles. We do have a special relationship, and we should nurture it, and we should make it better. But friends tell friends the truth. And to my friends in the United Kingdom, as we try to appreciate and reset our relationship, I would say to them gently and respectfully, the world's changed. You have to pay your own bills for a while. This isn't the fault of the good people of the United Kingdom. This is the fault of their political leadership. It's especially true of their current political leadership. But they have castrated their military. They're weak as rainwater. This hasn't happened in a week or a day or a month. It's happened over a long period of time. I remember when Great Britain ruled the seas. Now, when Iran fires a missile at their base in Cyprus, they can barely find one ship to send down there, and that ship barely made it. The political leadership in the United Kingdom is, I've watched it hollow out its industrial base. I've watched the political leadership in the United Kingdom spend all of their money on welfare. And you know what? It's their money. That's none of my business. If that's what they want to do in a democracy, Godspeed. but they've depended on the American taxpayer to defend them. And the political leadership, again, I say this gently, I don't want to do anything to take away from the King's speech. I say this gently and respectfully. It's time for the political leadership in the United Kingdom to embrace adulthood. And it's time for them to start paying their bills. And time for them to start spending money on the military. Now, I know the Prime Minister said we're going to do better. And he and some of our other allies in Europe are talking about now spending 3.5% of their GDP on defense and another 1.5% on infrastructure and support of defense. It's a lot of talk so far. Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, published his plan for the military and military spending. I actually read it. I thought this part was special. Yeah, he's going to start spending more money. But it's back-end loaded. It's not going to happen. They're not going to really spend any serious money until 2030. And I can assure you that Sir Keir will not be around as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom in September or October or January of 2030. He's struggling now. His poll numbers, probably shouldn't say this, but it's true. He's polling right up there with gonorrhea in terms of popularity. It's just a fact. So I do celebrate the special relationship that we have. And I do want us to be closer. But the political leadership in the United Kingdom has got to do its part. This is supposed to be a partnership. My final comment, the King, I think, is here through the rest of the day, the King and the Queen. And of course, even though it was a beautiful speech that King Charles gave, the real heavy lifting is done, as we all know, in private. The King is going to meet privately with President Trump, and they're going to talk about the world, and they're going to get down to the specifics of things we can do to help each other. And I don't know what the King is going to talk to the President about. I don't know if he's carrying messages from the political leadership in the United Kingdom. That's all above my pay grade. But if the King is carrying a message from the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to try to convince our President to give away the Diego Garcia military base to an African country, which is the BFF of China, I hope our President will continue to resist. I hope he will respond to that request if it's made by saying the short answer is hell no. The short answer is no. The long answer is hell no. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, as you know, Mr. President, we have the Chagos Islands are owned by the United Kingdom. They're in the Indian Ocean. On one of the islands, we built a military base with the United Kingdom called Diego Garcia. And it's a really important military base for both countries. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has decided, because the United Nations has made him feel guilty about Britain's colonial past, the United Nations has told Prime Minister Starmer that he's got to give away this military base to the African country of Mauritius, even though Mauritius has never owned Diego Garcia or the Chagos Islands. They have no connection with it, none whatsoever. But because the Prime Minister has this white guilt because the United Kingdom and the good people of Great Britain once controlled other countries, they're supposed to feel guilty and give away our military base and their military base to Mauritius, who will promptly turn the keys over to China. It's it's one of the, I think I described it one time as bone deep, down to the marrow, stupid, and it is. And eventually, the prime minister talked the president into it, and then President Trump came, as he always does, he thought it through, and he said, no, I'm not doing that. And so they're still sawing on him and working on him, and I don't know if the king's going to bring it up. And certainly it's the king's right if it does, but I hope the president will stand firm and let's not give away this military base to China. I'm going to spend my last few minutes on another topic. This one is important to all of us, but it's also important to Louisiana. I want to talk about carbon dioxide. We all know, we all have heard carbon dioxide, CO2. It's a gas. It's colorless. It's odorless. It's everywhere. It's actually a pretty small part of our atmosphere, really. I looked at the numbers. It's 0.04% of the Earth's atmosphere, so it's a really, really small part, but it packs a wallop. CO2 is composed of one atom of carbon and two atoms of oxygen. And it is produced naturally when we breathe out, for example. We breathe out carbon dioxide. It's produced naturally when organic matter decomposes. And it's very important to God's world. Plants use it for photosynthesis. It also is released when we burn fossil fuels. You've probably read that. And even though carbon dioxide has all these extraordinarily beneficial uses, one of the downsides of it is that it's a fairly heavy gas, and it rises, even though it's dispersed throughout our atmosphere. But it does rise, and it's what's called a greenhouse gas. It acts like a blanket. It says if you get enough CO2 in our atmosphere, it's like a blanket covers the earth. And what happens when you're under a blanket? It holds in heat. And that heat can change your natural temperature and sometimes impact your weather and your sea levels. And that's why you hear some folks talk about global warming and climate change. That's what we're talking about. That's all CO2 is. President, we don't have a world plan to deal with this problem. President Biden came up with a plan. It was called Spend as Much Money as I Possibly Can. He spent billions of dollars fighting CO2. I checked, you know how much all of the billions, and might have spent $1 trillion, but certainly billions of dollars of American taxpayer money that he spent. You know how much it lowered world's temperatures? None. Zero. Zilch. He never had a plan. It was always just throw money at the wall and see what happens. I hope in the future we can do better. But here's my point. One of the things that government did to try to combat CO2, or at least control CO2, is pay companies to capture it. And we're still doing that. And what do I mean by capture? Well, when companies, let's say take a petrochemical plant, when it burns fossil fuels, natural gas usually, it produces CO2, carbon dioxide. And there is a way under the technology to capture that CO2. What do you do with it? One option is to inject it into the ground, into the earth, deep beneath our feet. Now, you would hope that companies, many of them became, during the Biden years, very woke and they criticized anybody who asked questions about the President Biden's climate change plan. But the other reason they were so high on carbon capture is because the federal government was giving them bucket loads of money to capture this carbon. It's called the 45Q tax credit. We will actually pay these companies, like a petrochemical company, to capture carbon and inject it into the ground in the interest of our environment and climate. We pay $85. It's your money. You're paying it, not me. I pay a little bit of it when I pay my taxes, but we all pay it. We actually pay companies $85 a ton. The lobbyists of many of our friends in the business community are lobbying right now to increase the money that we pay them to $250 a ton. But just based on paying them $85 a ton, by 2030, we will be spending about $30 billion. So while I want to believe that the companies would capture the carbon in the interest of the environment, they're being paid a whole bunch of money to do it as well. I'm not saying they wouldn't do it anyway out of the goodness of their heart, but the money doesn't hurt, okay? You know what the old saying is? You don't have to be rich and famous to be happy. You just have to be rich. So anyway, we're paying companies a whole bunch of money to go capture this carbon and inject it in the ground. Now, I didn't come here tonight to debate whether that's a good idea or a bad idea. That's a lot of that is up to the states and to Congress for another day. There are pros and there are cons, and some say it's a good idea, some say it's a bad idea. I know certain oil and gas companies have been injecting CO2 into producing oil and gas wells for years to make the gas and oil flow better without hurting anybody. I know in other cases there have been CO2 pipelines, carbon dioxide pipelines transmitting carbon dioxide that have ruptured and injured people. I don't know who's right and I don't know who's wrong. I do know, though, that to inject it underground, you've got to do it on somebody's property. And that's where the rub comes in. We take our property rights in Louisiana seriously. Your right to own property is a federal constitutional right. In Louisiana, it's also a state constitutional right. So important, we put it in our state constitution. Article 1, Section 4 of our state constitution says, every person has the right to acquire, own, control, use, enjoy, protect, and dispose of private property. Now, our Constitution also goes on to say, because we're practical people in Louisiana, this right to own property is subject to reasonable statutory restrictions and the reasonable exercise of the police power. What does that mean? Well, as we all know, that means if I own a piece of property and they want to put a highway through, and I don't want them to put a highway through my property, but it would cost the taxpayers of my state 3 times the amount to move the highway over here as opposed to putting it through my property. Under the law, we call it expropriation. I think some states call it eminent domain. In my state, in every other state, and under the federal government, the state can come in and say, look, Kennedy, we know you don't want to give up your property, but it's going to cost us a lot more to put the road over here, so we're going to take your property, but we're going to pay you the full price. And they do. They have to. It's in our Constitution. They have to pay the full fair market price. So we're pretty comfortable with that. But the people in Louisiana have just discovered that the companies that I talked about, who are being paid this federal money, $85 a ton, to capture carbon and inject it into the ground can also take people's land to put in an injection well. And I don't like that. I'm not taking sides in terms of carbon capture. I am not. But we've got a lot of people in my state that are very suspect about the wisdom of this carbon capture. I'm not saying they're right or wrong, but they've learned the hard way that if you trust government, you failed history class. And if someone in my state who owns a piece of property, it's usually in my rural areas, who owns 50 acres that was handed down from their dad and mom and their dad and mom and their dad and mom, if a company wants to come in and pay them to put in an injection well and put carbon dioxide underneath their land, and those landowners are okay with that, I'm okay with it. But I'm going to have something to say if a lot of these companies start coming in and taking people's property and putting in an injection well. That's a big difference between putting in a road. This is a new technology. We're still learning about it. And right now, under Louisiana law, this is passed by the Louisiana legislature. The statute is Title 31, Section 1108. Louisiana Revised Statutes 31-1108. This is what it says. Any storage operator, that's the guy or gal who wants to put carbon dioxide into the ground, any storage operator is hereby authorized, after obtaining any permit or any certificate of public convenience and necessity from the commissioner, that means they get the permission of the state, can exercise the power of eminent domain and expropriate, take needed property. So if one of these companies comes to one of my people on their family land and says, we'll offer you this, we want to put an injection well, and the owners of that land go, I don't think so. This property's been in my family for years, and I don't know about this CO2 stuff anyway. They're not going to have a choice because the state can come in and take their land. And I don't like that. And I think our legislature needs to weigh in on this. And I think we ought to go back to what our state constitution says and what the federal constitution has said even longer. People have the right to property. People have the right to property. That concludes my remarks, Mr. President. I can show myself out. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alston Brooks.